Hello everyone. Today I'd like to talk to you about Trudvang. So Trudvang is a role-playing game put out by the Swedish company RiotMinds. They did a Kickstarter project a few years ago and put out the core products for this game. They put out a player's handbook, a bestiary, and a game master guide. First, I'd like to talk to you about the theme. The theme is very Norse inspired. So you've got you can see that throughout the religions in the game. There's the Stormlander area of the human society that is very, looking into it, it's very much inspired by traditional Norse religion as much as we know about it. So that's, I find that very fascinating and very interesting that they drew from this historical religion to inform this role playing system, and they've basically taken this and said, how could these sacrifices and rituals, what would happen if they went wrong? And so seeing the sort of creations and the monsters and stuff that can come out of that, and the bad things that can happen to you, are very, very cool. And those things alone set up a lot of kind of adventure hooks, and a lot of, you can flesh out some interesting locations just by reading through this theme and just through the lore of this book, or of these books. And that's a huge plus for me in this game, is the theme is just through and through the entire system. And so the theme is just amazing. I love it. It's one that even if I don't play Trudvang in the future very much, I may continue to go back to it over and over again just for more ideas about these monsters and the areas, and how the religion is so much more tied to the entire setting, and how the religion can be tied to a lot of interesting adventure hooks and a lot of really cool aspects of play. All right, now production. So the production of these books, man, I don't know how well it's going to pick up on the camera if you've got a glare there, but this art by Paul Bonner, and you can see here, I talked about it being inspired by real, like Norse religions we know it. This building here reminds me of a stave church, sort of the early churches in Iceland that we have historical examples of. Just really cool stuff, and you can even see the presumably a dim walker here from the game is carrying this iron rod, this staff with him, very reminiscent of some of the things that we have in historical texts about the traditional Norse religion and what those people did. It's very interesting how they pulled that into it. So the art in the game, Paul Bonner did a huge amount of this art. You can see this massive troll here, just beautiful. Paul Bonner did most of what is colored or inked inside the book, from what I can tell. And then Alvaro Tapia did a lot of the just black and white, or the pen and pencil, pen art, whatever you call that. I'm not an artist. But just really good stuff. I really, really like the art in this book. I think it really helps the theme show through. So that was great. And I will say, for production quality, the printing is good. I think the printing could use some work, because I think that a lot of times the book, they do lay open pretty well. I think I would prefer them to lay open a little better in certain aspects, but some of the books weren't laying open quite as well as I'd like, but still a really good, as far as the printer goes, on the actual print copy production is really high. I think it's very, very good. I'm not actually a fan of the texture of the paper that much, the thickness of the paper, but that's fine. Now the text does need some work, so I think it needed more proofing. So this is a Swedish company, so I don't know how much editing was put into it, but it doesn't seem like there was quite enough. So there's multiple places throughout every book that I find typos, I find odd wording, I find where a space is in the wrong slot and letters are split and it's not quite right. So I think that could have been fixed through a little bit more thorough edit job, and that may be fixed in future printings, I don't know. But I have the original print from the Kickstarter, so that's what I've got, and that's what I've got to review. So but I still found it very playable. So as far as the rules go, this is a D20 game, but it's a little bit different from your D&D and Pathfinder. So In this game, you're going to have a score that is usually defined by your character sheet that you're trying to roll under. If my score in a certain activity, when all things are said and done, is 15, I need to roll a d20 and get a 15 or less on that thing. So when I look at my character sheet, I have a pretty good idea of how effective I will be at a certain thing. Much more like the Call of Cthulhu role-playing game and things like that. That's kind of what this reminds me of. So how do you make a character in Trudvang? Well, here on page 9, there's this nice checklist that shows you everything you have to do. You just follow these steps to make a character. The problem is, as soon as you turn this page, you don't end up on step 1. You will immediately find yourself flipping back and forth through the pages of the rulebook just to make a character, when it could have just been in order. So I had some problems with the organization of the book. As for making a character, what you actually do, step 1 is to decide how many creation points you're going to have when you make a character. Usually between 300 and 700, which sounds like a lot, but they get spent really fast. So what you'll find is that while you can specialize in one thing and be really good, you're going to be giving up a few other areas even when you have 500 or 700 points to spend. So you're already presented with some difficult choices in the game and what you want to do. Most of what you spend those points on are going to be your disciplines and your specialties. I'll get into that later, but before that, the next step is to choose your race and your culture. After picking how many points you'll have, next they suggest that you go through and pick your race and your culture. And whenever you pick your race, you've got several options to pick from. You can pick from human, elf, dwarf, half troll, half elf, and dwarf troll. So most of these races, they actually have very little effect on the gameplay. They can have effect on role-playing options and what happens socially in the game, but as far as mechanically what they don't do very much. Mostly what you'll find is that the races lock you into a specific religion or set of religions you can pick from. I can't remember if the Player's Handbook or the Game Master Guide explicitly state that one race or culture can ascribe to a different religion than what is typical, but it does hint at this in the Player's Handbook for sure. In the section on half-trolls, which are a mixture of humans and trolls, the Player's Handbook says, remember that half-troll is just a race name. Half-trolls raised by humans tend to also have human cultures. And then it goes on to describe some different kinds of half-trolls that could live in human culture. So there really isn't going to be anything wrong with you picking a race and mixing and matching a religion with it. Along with giving you some guidance on which religions you might want to pick by your race choice, it will determine your maximum moving speed in combat and also your body points. They use body points to refer to hit points in this game. The only thing I could find in the race section of the rulebook that set one race apart from the others was in the dwarves. Dwarves can see up to 10 meters with a weak light source as if it were day. Other than that, I couldn't find much of a difference between the different races as far as their abilities go. After choosing a race and a culture, you'll pick which of your characteristics are going to be positive or negative, and how much positive and negative they'll be. For your character traits, you can choose to have an average score in everything, where you leave everything as 0, or you can choose to go up and down in those traits. You can go up or down 1, 2, or 4. These stats cost 15 points per level that you go up in them. So for +1, it costs 15 points, but if you go up to +4 in a stat, it costs you 60 character creation points to do that. There are 7 different characteristics, so you can see how that would get very expensive very fast. You can take a negative in one of these characteristics, and that gets you some more character creation points. So you could take a -1 or 2 or 4 in a stat if you really don't think you're going to need it, and that'll get you points back that you can spend on your character creation, maybe on stats or on other disciplines and specialties. The core character traits are charisma, constitution, dexterity, intelligence, perception, psyche, and strength. You'll actually find during the game most of these have passive abilities, so they're either going to affect your damage all the time, like with strength, or with constitution affect how much you heal every night, or with psyche affect how many days you can last in the wild. For most of the dice rolling you'll be doing in the game, you'll be trying to roll under a target number that's on your character sheet, defined by your disciplines and specialties. So you won't actually use these stats very much when you're rolling dice. Occasionally you will, but most of the time you won't. After you decide on your character traits, then you'll move on to pick what archetype you want. The core archetypes in the game are Bard, Dimwalker, which is like a wizard but religion based, So you'll pick a religion, and that'll be your core way you cast spells. Dweller, which is like a type of craftsman. Ranger, Rogue, Vintner Weaver, which is like a traditional wizard, and Warrior. Whenever you pick an archetype, that archetype will give you 50 bonus points to spend in character creation on different disciplines and specialties. Then, when you get into disciplines and specialties, that's kind of where it gets a little hairy. So, disciplines and specialties each cost 7 per level that you are buying. So, level 1 costs 7 points. Level 2 costs 14 points, not total, but in addition. So, to get from level 0 in a discipline to level 2 is going to cost you 21 points. You got to pay 7, then 14. Then it keeps going up from there. Certain skills will give you a discount on that. So your dexterity may give you a discount on your agility purchases of disciplines and specialties equal to what level you are in that characteristic. So if you have a +2 in dexterity, you'll get a discount of 2 off every discipline and specialty you buy under the agility skill. So in order to buy the level of a discipline or specialty, you first have to be at least level 4 in that main skill. So if I want the battle maneuver discipline, I have to first be at least level 4 in agility. So if I want to learn how to evade, I first have to have at least 1 level of battle maneuver. But for every level of evade, I have to have a certain requirement in agility. So for level 1 of evade, I have to have at least level 4 in agility. And then for level 2 and 3, I'd have 7 points in agility. And then for levels 4 and 5, I'd have my agility maxed out at 10. So to figure out how good I am at a certain thing, in some cases, such as swimming, I have to add up, and it's all in your character sheet. So once you've done the addition, it all makes sense, and you have it available to you. It's not that difficult, but doing all the math can be a little bit of a chore. So you take for swimming as an example, you take your agility score and add to it your body control discipline, how many levels you have in that, and then you add in double the level that you have in swimming, the specialty. So I end up with a number between 1 if I just have the base level 1 in agility and nothing else, or if I max out everything, I get all the way up to 25. There will be certain circumstances where you want more than 20 in a skill if you've been adventuring for long enough, because you may run into negative modifiers onto your skill that may mean that, yeah, when you roll that die, you add 5 to it. And so you may need something even higher than 20 to guarantee success all the time. It's going to be very difficult for you to get enough points to guarantee success without having a lot of detriments everywhere else in your character sheet. And that's kind of a theme of the game, is you can be really good at one thing and bad at a lot, or you can kind of be a jack of all trades but not really be very good at anything. So it kind of depends on how you want to do it. I recommend to my players that they each specialize. That way, if they needed something done, somebody could do it. And it seemed to work pretty well. The combat in this game is very brutal. So a couple things you're going to need to look at whenever you start making a character in this game are the evade skill and the parry skill. So parrying lets you save combat points to parry an attack that's targeted against you, which is fantastic. Because then you can negate some of the damage. It might hurt your weapon, but you're going to negate the damage at least if you succeed. But you have to save enough combat points to actually make the parry. So if you only save 5 points, you're going to have to roll 5 or less to make that parry. The more combat points you save, the better chances you're going to have of being able to actually parry that attack when they do attack you. The evade skill is really good because the higher it is, the more times you can evade per round, and you don't need combat points for it. You can just dodge the attack. So that's a very good ability. So if I want to learn how to evade, I first have to have at least 1 level of battle maneuver. But for every level of evade, I have to have a certain requirement in agility. So for level 1 of evade, I have to have at least level 4 in agility. And then for level 2 and 3, I'd have 7 points in agility. And then for levels 4 and 5, I'd have my agility maxed out at 10. The disciplines and specialties for combat get pretty detailed, and the back of your character sheet actually has an entire section about combat. Basically, when combat starts, you flip your character sheet over, because this is what you use for combat. I really liked that you kind of switch modes from one to the other. So after you've made a character, and after you've put all your points and everything. You're kind of gotten set. After you go on an adventure, the game master will tell you how many adventure points you get. So you'll get between 1 and 5 usually. I was pretty generous, and I gave out 5 to 10 adventure points every time, just because I wanted to see them really get better and have a lot of adventure points to spend. So what you end up with is a fairly mathy system where you've got to go through and put in all your numbers on everything and buy and add and subtract from your points and everything. And doing it on paper is very difficult. So I made an Excel spreadsheet that did it. There's several people that online that I've seen that have made different tools to help you with this. Sometimes there's errors in those. So, and I had found some errors in mine. So you have to double check it with pen and paper is what I did, just to make sure everything worked out okay. So overall, I did like all the options you have on your character. However, the issue is in this character sheet, a lot of these dozens of skills have specific rules and abilities that unlock at a specific level of that specialty or discipline. And trying to keep all that straight, especially for a player that may just be playing this game once every few weeks and they don't own the books and they're just here to play, there's a lot to remember about these specialties and disciplines. It's very interesting that you can create a character very easily that has probably never been created before by the exact layout of the skills and specialties and disciplines and everything. You can probably create fairly easily a unique character that no one has ever played before. That's one advantage this game has, I think, over a lot of role-playing games, is there's so much choice. You have total control over your character in what they're good at, what they're bad at. And even if I choose one archetype, I may get bonus points in that archetype, but it doesn't lock me out of doing anything else. So I can be a fighter archetype and still go and get magic and use magic. It doesn't stop me from doing any of that. The combat in this game is very detailed. So you get down to spending little combat points on every step of movement, on every attack, and you decide how much attention you spend on the attack. So if I spend 15 attack points on one attack, I need to roll a 15 or less on my d20 to score a hit. That's fantastic. I get one attack. I could attack 3 times and put 5 into each one of those attacks if I have the right weapon for it. And so I might be able to score a couple more hits, or maybe I do 7 and 8, try to split the difference and get 2 hits in. And at low levels, you're probably going to stick to 1 or 2 attacks. Once you've been playing for a while, you have your character's advanced quite a bit. You might be regularly hitting 2 or 3 times in a round. One thing I really appreciated in this game was how whenever a combat happens, or is about to happen, or might happen, everyone at the table feels a certain weight on them about that decision to fight. The combat in this game is not something you just rush into every time you have the chance to kill something. That is not a good idea in this game. The choice to fight is one you take seriously. Because when you fight, you know at the start of that fight that the longer the fight goes, the worse off you're going to be. You're going to be taking these negative modifiers more and more and be in a worse and worse position as the fight goes on. And the idea that one person may run and get back up and come back with reinforcements, that's terrifying. Also, when you decide to fight, you know that fight, the longer it drags on, the more health you lose, the longer it's going to take you to recover from that fight. This is not a game that you go to bed and you wake up at 100%. That never happens in this game. If you get into a fight and it's a bad fight, it may take you a week to recover from that. That makes every decision to go into a combat an important one. The entire table thinks about it whenever you're about to get into a fight because they know what the price is for that combat. What is the best way to engage this enemy? Do we need to parlay with them? Do we need to get another group on our side to come attack? Do we need to come when they're sleeping? Do we need to find when this person's alone? Do we need to figure out this monster's habits or this monster's routine and catch it when it's at its weakest? it really gets everyone at the table thinking about more, in my mind, more realistically about how you would act in the situation for real, because the stakes are very high in every fight, just how it would be in real life. Another reason why the combat is so brutal in this game is as a human, you get around 30 hit points forever. It doesn't go up. It may be modified by your constitution and some things like that, but your base hit points stays the same while you play. So as you gain experience and gain more adventure points and you put those slot those into your skills and get better at certain things, your hit points are going to stay the same. And there's creatures in this game that have 600 hit points. So it becomes very difficult to try to tank through some of this stuff. You really have to be very conscious of where you're putting your skill points and what you're doing with them, because your hit points aren't going to get you that far. In addition to combat being difficult, healing is very difficult. So in this game, the base healing that everyone gets, if you have just a neutral score in Constitution, you heal 1 hit point per day. 1. You can bump that up by getting a higher Constitution score, but you need all of your scores to be high in this game. While I enjoyed the combat a lot, one issue I can see, especially for a lot of players, is the built-in death spiral. So in this game, as you take damage, once you get down to a quarter of your health and then half your health and 3/4 of your health, you get more and more additional negative modifiers put onto you, making it harder to do everything. So you may go from taking 3 attacks in a round to barely being good at taking 1 attack in a round. It might become that stark of a difference. If you have players that are interested in making a more roleplay oriented character or a more social politicking character, you can definitely do that in this game. There's a lot of skills and support for that. As the game master, you really need to make sure they put some points into their fighting skills, because if they don't put anything in the fighting, this game lets them make that mistake. And if it comes to a fight and they have no points in combat, they're just going to stand there. And that's not going to be good. They will be very disappointed, very upset. There's very few games that let you make that decision. I like that the game lets you make the decision, but you need to know that up front. And I wish the game had explained that a little bit better. But ultimately, it's going to be on the game master to make sure that the players review their character sheet and make sure that this is a viable character for the game that you're going to run. You should know about how much combat you're going to put into the game. So you need to make sure that their characters are going to be competent in combat, at least to defend themselves, if not be effective fighters. The magic rules in this game are fantastic. I say fantastic a lot. I love it. I love them. They're so good. So the magic rules in this game state that there's an equal and opposite reaction for everything that happens. So let's say you have a dim walker or a Vintner Weaver summon some water. Now, normally, the way it works is it talks about the threads of Vintner throughout Trudvang, and about how whenever a Vintner Weaver casts, they're weaving the threads of Vintner to create a certain effect. And they're tugging on these threads of Vintner, and whenever they do that, there are reactions, and the world acts out or sometimes lashes out against as a reaction against this magic. So let's say a Vintner Weaver creates some water. Now, if there's not been much casting in this area, the best way I know to describe it is that the weave of Vintner is very loose at that time. So when you tug on the threads of Vintner, there's very little reaction. And so when you create that water had to come from somewhere. So that water may have come from the 1/4 mile radius around you. And so you're barely going to notice as that water is pulled from the ground and the trees and the living beings around. You're barely going to notice that water being taken from those things to come pooled up in one place. However, if you're casting multiple times very large and flashy spells over and over again, the the game master is encouraged to have negations start to happen, very noticeable negations. So I heard one story where some people were, they needed to get someone teleported to them. They didn't have a spell that would do this, but they did have a spell that could teleport things away from them. And so they knew that negations happened, and so they knew that the vintner would probably lash out at them a little bit, but they might be able to use that to their advantage, even. And so they started teleporting these human-sized, roughly human-sized objects to the location where that person was. And after casting over and over again, eventually negation started to happen. That person got sucked back to where they were as part of the negation. And so that's a really cool idea, that you can read these spells and be like, that's an interesting effect. How can we use it in a different way? And so this game really, really provides a lot of space for creativity, especially if your game master is open to working with that. And I suggest, if you buy this game, it is so difficult. If your players are coming up with creative ways to use the spells, let them, because this game is so hard. So when you cast a spell in this game, you'll have a certain number you're trying to roll under with your d20. And so if you fail, then there's going to be probably some form of negation, but nothing too serious. If you roll a 20, which is a critical failure, or in this game they call it a fatal failure. So when you have a fatal failure, you roll on the fatal magic table. And when you roll on this fatal magic table, you roll a d10, and then it open rolls, or it explodes basically, on either a 10, a 9 or a 10, or an 8, 9, or 10, depending on how dark the magic was that you were casting. You pick when you become a Vintner Weaver if you want to cast with white, gray, or dark magic, and that affects your fatal magic table rolls. So you start rolling this 10-sided die, and every time you roll an 8, 9, or 10, depending on which kind of Vintner Weaver you are, you roll it again and add that number to your result, and you roll it again if that's still an 8, 9, or 10, or if it's your open roll value. And then once you're done rolling, you add the total number of Vintner points you spent on that spell, which could be very low. It could be 1 or 2, or if you're getting to some of the higher spells, it may be like 10 or 15 if you're really pumping up a spell for a crazy effect. And when that happens, once you roll the die and add your number of Vintner points spent onto the roll, you consult the table. Now, if it's less than 20, nothing happens. Fantastic. Got off easy. The Fatal Magic table lists anything from you feel lethargic and apathetic, you get a -2 on everything you try to do for the next 1 to 3 hours. You might get some weird visual effects, which will affect your role-playing encounters, such as your hair turning to grass, your fingers doubling in length, everyone around you suffering from one of these effects as well. So it could make your entire group have some really weird effects going on. If you get really high on the table, so the worst is 60 plus, it could do damage to the Vintner Weaver permanently, or it may even kill the Vintner Weaver and the people around them. And so it just depends on how badly you roll. The rolls get up to 60. So at low, when you first start out playing, it's very unlikely that's going to happen. You're not going to be putting very many Vintner points into your magic whenever you cast, but as you keep playing, you get more Vintner points, and you start spending more and more Vintner on your spells. They can get more and more dangerous every time you cast, and that's something that makes this game very different to me. So the monster book in this game is called Jorgi's Bestiary. This book is amazing. This is probably my favorite book so far. This gives you so much lore about these monsters, and it's not just lore that's just generic facts about the monsters. This is actionable information that you can use in your game. So for the Barrow Wight, just as an example, you can see how much is lore in this game. This section here is written from Jorgi's perspective. So this is like an adventurer writing a journal about the things he saw. And then the next page, you got a little bit more here, and then the actual abilities and stats of the creature. So the information here is so detailed and so narrative focused that you could create entire adventures off these entries, and that's what I did. Whenever I played this game, there was no starting out like easy adventure for people to go on. So I looked at the trolls, because trolls are a big part of the game, and read through the descriptions of all the trolls, and I had the trolls do troll things and had the players deal with it. And that was so much fun, and it came organically from just sitting and reading this bestiary. If you're not sold on the game as a whole, I can still recommend you just to buy the bestiary. This bestiary is amazing. It's got such creative monsters in it. It has so many kinds of trolls. It has so many kinds of giants. The giants in this game are so fundamentally different in how they play and what they do in the world and how they function and how they will affect the story, that every giant will feel unique. And in this game, these monsters are so powerful. You only need to throw one at the party, and it's going to be a monster to deal with. The bestiary refers to dragons as worms, and there are so many different kinds of worms in this game. Everything from like this giant fire-breathing Loki worm, which literally just means fire worm or fire dragon, down to a Brascal worm, which is kind of a cross between a snake and a chicken, and yet they can petrify things. I threw a Brascal worm at the party very early on, and we have this terrifying story we will never forget while they're getting a bag and trying to scare it into the bag and not look at it, and it was so complicated, and then being able to finally bag it and then just beat the tar out of it. It was hilarious, and we'll never forget that story. And just the way that Jorgi's bestiary described how the thing acted and behaved and what it looks like and sounds like, uh, it's such a good bestiary. I really, really enjoy that, and I would recommend that to someone that just wants to run kind of a Norse themed game or get some new, fresh ideas in their game of whatever they're playing. If you're playing some kind of fantasy game like this, I think Jorgi's Bestiary could really be a benefit to you. So, support for the game. This game has gotten a decent amount of support since it came out. I think it's gotten a good amount. I don't think it's definitely not overwhelming, but I do like that they've continued to support the game. They've put out a Muspelheim set, which is about the dwarves, and I have that. I have the Stormlander set as well. I really enjoyed that one. And they're currently about to fulfill the elves set on Kickstarter. And I suspect they'll continue to support the game in the future. So I think the future looks very good for Trudvang. I think it's going to keep going, and I think there's going to be a lot more content for it in the future. At least more content for the Midlanders, which is another region of Trudvang, and Westmark. I know at least those two regions will get support for sure. And then I could easily see them adding more adventures and more content for some other regions of Trudvang. They're also making a Trudvang for 5e. So if you're interested in the world of Trudvang, but the system is not really grabbing you, you might look into that. I think it's on pre-order now. I have it pre-ordered. I'm very excited about that. There are certain things that I don't know how well it's going to mesh with 5e, but I'm going to try it. We'll see how it goes. And if it doesn't work, hey, just change it. That's what I did with some of this whenever we played it, was I made certain things easier, a little bit kinder to the players than just the baseline game described. So this game, I think, is for people that are really looking for a challenge-based play, that want it to be a struggle to survive, and they find that fun. That's what I like. This game poses a lot of difficult decisions to you from the very beginning of the game. The first time you make a character in this game, it very well may not be any good at all. It'll be okay, because you'll probably die, and you can make a new one. But you'll have to be okay with that from the start of the game. That's something I'll make it very clear. If you're buying this game, you're going to play it. and you're the DM or the game master, you need to explain that to your players that there's there's a very good chance that they could die in this game very easily. But really, if you're looking for something very challenge oriented, I can really recommend this to you. It's very crunchy, but there's a good amount of support for it. There's so many details in the lore, and it's so well thought out, and I really enjoy the lore on it. The game has some issues, but everything is going to. But if you can deal with the crunch of the game, I think you'll really like it because the theme permeates every part of this game. All of the mechanics, uh, all of the monsters, all of the lore, everything. The theme is just through and through all of it. And if this theme is something you're looking for, but you maybe don't want the crunch, I would definitely recommend getting Jorgi's Bestiary. The Bestiary alone is such a wonderful tool. The descriptions in it are written from a player's perspective in the game. Not a player's perspective, they're written from Jorgi's perspective, right? So Jorgi is basically writing this journal about the monsters he's encountered over his career and over his life. And just the way it's written, all of these monsters are set in a story already because he's telling you that story. So you can easily just take that story and drop it in your game and just make that part of your adventure. And that was very satisfying and very easy to do. The monsters and the lore in this game just are dying to be made into adventures. That's what I really, really enjoyed. I think it was one of the major strengths of this game is how strong the lore is and how well done this bestiary is. Well, until next time, have fun gaming. I threw that at my players very early on, and it proved to be very interesting as they. Here comes my cat. Hi. Hi. How are you? How are you?